The twin moons of Tarsus IV hung like pale sentinels in the rust-colored sky, their surfaces scarred by 7 years of orbital bombardments. Fres-Autaf stood on the observation deck of the mobile command fortress, his hardened outer shell gleaming with the traditional polish befitting a commander of his status. 3 feet tall and encased in a bark-like carapace that had earned him 12 battle decorations, Fres-Autaf was the pride of the Imperium's 7th subjugation fleet. 7 years, he chittered softly to himself, his vocalization membranes vibrating with a hint of satisfaction. 7 years since the humans thought they could challenge the might of the Fres Imperium on this world. The memory of his arrival was still vivid in his consciousness. Tarsus IV had been a jewel in humanity's colonial expansion, a fertile world with vast mineral resources and a climate amenable to human physiology. The Fres High Command had deemed it strategically vital for the continued expansion of the Imperium. The humans, predictably, had refused to cede the planet peacefully. Their resistance had been impressive, Fres-Autaf admitted privately. For a species so technologically inferior to the Fres, humans possessed a remarkable capacity for adaptation and innovation. In the early days of the conflict, they had even managed to repel the initial Fres landing forces, using the planet's unusual magnetic fields to disrupt Fres targeting systems. But Fres-Autaf had not risen to command through carelessness or arrogance. Unlike many of his peers who dismissed humans as primitive bipeds, he had studied their tactical doctrines, learned their patterns, anticipated their innovation. When he was given command of the Tarsus campaign in its 3rd year, after the disgrace and execution of his predecessor, he had implemented a radical new strategy. "Commander?" Fres-Medhic approached, interrupting his reminiscence. "The preparatory bombardment has begun as ordered. The final human stronghold will be softened sufficiently within 2 standard cycles." Fres-Autaf's outer shell rippled with approval, the Fres equivalent of a nod. "Excellent. And the energy grid disruptors?" "Deployed and functional, sir. The humans will not be able to generate shield harmonics to counter our plasma weapons this time." Ah, yes. The shield harmonics, that had been one of the humans' more clever adaptations, a method of modulating their energy shields to partially neutralize the destructive potential of Fres plasma cannons. It had cost the Imperium thousands of soldiers before Fres-Autaf had developed a countermeasure. Their latest attempt to deploy autonomous combat drones has also been neutralized, Fres-Medhic continued. Our electronic warfare suites have achieved complete spectrum dominance. The combat drones had been particularly troublesome, small, agile machines that could penetrate Fres defensive lines and self-destruct with devastating effect. They had appeared suddenly in the 5th year of the war, a desperate human gambit that had briefly turned the tide in 3 sectors. But like all human innovations, Fres-Autaf had studied and countered them. "And what of their biological weapons research?" Fres-Autaf inquired, his outer shell hardening slightly at the memory. Fres-Medhic's coloration paled momentarily. "No evidence of renewed development, Commander. The destruction of their research facility in the Meridian Valley appears to have ended that particular threat." That had been the humans' most insidious effort, an attempt to engineer a pathogen that specifically targeted the unique biochemistry of Fres shells. They had come dangerously close to deploying it 6 months ago. The Fres response had been proportional. The Meridian Valley, once a lush agricultural center, was now a radioactive wasteland that would remain uninhabitable for centuries. "Very good," Fres-Autaf chittered, moving to the central holographic display that dominated the command center. "Show me the current disposition of our forces." The display flickered to life, revealing a 3-dimensional representation of the battlefield. The final human stronghold, a massive, reinforced structure that had once served as the colonial capital, stood, isolated in the center, surrounded by concentric rings of Fres military units, artillery batteries, assault vehicles, infantry formations, and the towering Devastator units, all positioned with mathematical precision to ensure the complete annihilation of the last human resistance on Tarsus 4. "It is beautiful," Fresaltov remarked, his outer shell rippling with pride. The culmination of 7 years of adaptation and persistence. The first year of his command had been challenging. The humans had held significant territory, their supply lines were intact, and their morale remained high. Fresaltov had recognized that a direct assault would be costly and potentially unsuccessful. Instead, he had implemented a strategy of systematic isolation, cutting off human settlements one by one, destroying their infrastructure, poisoning their water supplies, and contaminating their agricultural lands. By the 4th year, human-held territory had contracted to a handful of fortified cities. The Fress had unleashed a new weapon then, atmospheric processors that gradually altered the planet's air composition, making it increasingly toxic to human respiratory systems, but perfectly suitable for Fress physiology. It was a long-term strategy, one that many on the Fress High Command had criticized as too slow. But Fresaltov had persisted, confident in his approach. Humans are adaptable, but even they cannot evolve new lungs, he had argued in his reports. The atmospheric processors had proven devastatingly effective. One by one, the human cities had fallen as their atmospheric scrubbers failed or their protective domes cracked under Fress bombardment. The 5th year had seen the development of the resonance cannons, massive weapons that could generate vibrations at precisely the frequency needed to shatter human bone. Deployed against the city of New Arcadia, they had killed thousands without damaging a single structure. The psychological impact had been profound, triggering a mass exodus as survivors fled toward the colonial capital. That exodus had played perfectly into Fresaltov's strategy, concentrating the remaining human population in a single location where they could be contained and ultimately eliminated. The 6th year had been a methodical tightening of the noose, cutting off supply routes, neutralizing human counterattacks, and slowly pushing inward toward the final stronghold. And now, in the 7th year, the last human refuge was surrounded, its defenses failing, its population starving. Victory was not merely imminent, it was inevitable. Commander Fresaxel, the chief logistics officer, approached with a data crystal. The latest projection models indicate that the humans will exhaust their food supplies within 14 standard cycles, their ammunition within 9, and their medical supplies within 5. Fresaltov accepted the crystal, inserting it into a receptor at the base of his shell. Data flowed directly into his consciousness, detailed analyses of human resource consumption rates, predictive models of civilian unrest, probability matrices of various surrender scenarios. "That way he will not surrender," he chittered confidently. "Not after 7 years. Their commander, General Winters, is too stubborn. He would rather see his people starve than accept Fress rule." Fresaltov had developed a grudging respect for the human general over the years. Winters was a worthy adversary, resourceful, unpredictable, and fiercely protective of the population under his command. Their indirect chess match across the battlefields of Tarsus 4 had sharpened Fresaltov's own tactical acumen. In another context, in another universe perhaps, they might have been colleagues, but in this reality, only one of them would survive this conflict. And Fresaltov had no intention of being the one who perished. "I want a full sensor sweep of the fortress interior," he ordered. "The humans have proven resourceful in concealing their activities from our surveillance. I will not be surprised by some final, desperate gambit." His officers moved to comply, their shells rippling with acknowledgement as they returned to their stations. Fresaltov turned his attention back to the observation window, gazing out at the battlefield below. The once verdant plains of Tarsus IV had been transformed into a scarred wasteland, the legacy of 7 years of total war. He remembered when the plains had been covered with the golden grain that humans cultivated for sustenance, when the horizon had been dotted with their primitive but charming agricultural structures. All gone now, reduced to ash and crater-pocked desolation by the necessities of conquest. Behind him, The command center hummed with activity as his staff coordinated the bombardment. Streams of plasma fire arced through the sky, impacting against the weakening shields of the human fortress with blinding flashes. It was a display of fresh military might that would have instilled awe in any observer. Fres Althoff felt his shell flush with anticipation. Soon, very soon, the shields would fail completely. Then the ground assault would begin, and by nightfall, the human presence on Tarsus 4 would be reduced to nothing more than a historical footnote in the annals of the Fresh Imperium. "Commander," Fres Dexol, his strategic analysis officer, approached. "I've been reviewing the latest intelligence on human communications within the fortress. There's something unusual in their patterns." Fres Althoff turned, his attentional sensory organs focusing on the junior officer. "Explain." "Their internal communications have decreased by 73% over the past 3 cycles, Fres Dexol reported, his shell paling slightly in concern, "and the content of the remaining transmissions is odd. They're not discussing defensive strategies or resource allocation. They're sharing stories, sir. Personal histories, mythological tales, fragments of their cultural narratives." "Fatalism," Fres Althoff chittered dismissively. "They know their situation is hopeless. They take comfort in their primitive cultural traditions as they face extinction." But even as he spoke, a faint disquiet rippled through his shell. Humans were emotionally volatile creatures, yes, but they were also pragmatic, especially when facing existential threats. This behavior pattern was inconsistent with his extensive experience fighting them. "Perhaps," Fres Dexol agreed, though his posture suggested continued unease. "But there's more. Their power consumption within the fortress has increased by 34%, yet we detect no corresponding increase in shield strength or weapons charging." Now that was concerning. Energy was precious in a siege situation. For the humans to be using more of it without any visible defensive benefit. "What are they powering?" Fres Althoff demanded. "Unknown, sir. Our sensor penetration of the fortress interior is limited by the remaining jamming systems. We can detect the increase in energy consumption, but not its specific application." Fres Althoff's shell hardened with irritation. "Intensify the bombardment on their known power generation facilities. Whatever they're planning, I want it disabled before it becomes operational." "At once, Commander." Fres Dexol acknowledged, moving to relay the order. Fres Althoff returned his gaze to the battlefield, his earlier satisfaction now tinged with caution. 7 years of war had taught him one vital lesson about humans. They were most dangerous when they appeared most defeated. He thought back to the Battle of Kronos Ridge in the 4th year. Fres forces had cornered a human battalion in a narrow valley, cut off from supplies and reinforcement. Victory seemed assured. Then, as Fres troops moved in for the kill, the humans had detonated explosives buried throughout the ridge, triggering a massive landslide that buried 3,000 Fres soldiers. Or the siege of New Geneva in year 5. As Fres forces breached the city's outer defenses, the humans had released a swarm of nanites that temporarily disrupted Fres neural functions, allowing the majority of the city's population to escape through underground tunnels. Time and again, Fres Althoff had learned that humans were at their most innovative when facing extinction. It was a trait both admirable and deeply frustrating. "Maintain heightened alert across all units," he ordered the command center at large. "The humans may attempt some final act of defiance. I want all anomalies reported immediately, no matter how insignificant they might seem." As his officers acknowledged the command, Fres Althoff felt the subtle vibration in the deck plates that indicated the mobile command fortress was adjusting its position, moving closer to the battlefield as the final assault drew near. Soon the bombardment would conclude, and the ground forces would advance. Soon, the 7-year struggle for Tarsus 4 would end in glorious victory for the Fresh Imperium. And yet, that subtle disquiet remained, a faint disruption in the otherwise perfect synchronicity of his battle plan. What were the humans planning? What final desperate strategy might General Winters attempt to salvage some fragment of hope from the ashes of defeat? Commander Fresseltoff approached. The latest scans indicate minimal human activity within the fortress. They appear to have centralized their remaining forces around their command center. Desperation? Fresseltoff said dismissively. They huddled together like frightened younglings. It will only make our victory more efficient. As the bombardment continued, Fresseltoff reviewed the battle plan once more. Unlike other Fress commanders who often underestimated human resilience, he had prepared for every contingency. Multiple assault vectors, reserve forces positioned to respond to any surprises, and continuous surveillance of the fortress to detect any attempt at escape. The communications officer suddenly chittered in alarm. "Commander, our orbital sensors are detecting multiple objects entering the atmosphere." Fresseltoff turned sharply. "Human reinforcements? Impossible. Our blockade has been in place for months." "Confirming orbital breach, sir," Fressel reported, his shell paling slightly. 23 objects descending rapidly. They appear to be transport vessels, but the configuration is unlike anything in our database. Display visual feed. The central holographic projector flickered to life, showing crude, bulky vessels plummeting through the atmosphere. They were not the sleek, energy-shielded transports typical of human forces, but rather blocky, primitive-looking craft with absurdly thick armor plating. "What is this?" Fresseltoff hissed, his outer shell rippling with disgust. "Are they so desperate they've resorted to using museum pieces?" "Sir, our orbital defenses are engaging, but—" Fress Metvik paused, clearly perplexed. "The vessel's armor is absorbing our energy weapons with minimal effect. They're simply pushing through the blockade by brute force." Fresseltoff felt a prickle of unease. "Redirect half of our bombardment batteries to target those transports. Whatever primitive strategy the humans are attempting, I want it ended before it begins." The artillery units swiftly complied, sending lances of deadly plasma skyward. Several of the descending craft erupted in flames, breaking apart in spectacular explosions. But to Fresseltoff's mounting concern, the majority continued their descent, seemingly undeterred. "In the imminent, Fress," Eichsel warned. The first transport crashed into the battlefield with enough force to send tremors through the command platform. Rather than deploying landing gear or anti-gravity systems, the crude human vessel had simply fallen. The sheer barbarism of it offended Fresseltoff's sensibilities. "These humans have truly devolved," he muttered, watching as more transports crashed into the landscape around the besieged fortress. "To think they once challenged us with proper technology." But his contempt turned to confusion as the sides of the crashed transports burst open. From within emerged human figures, but not the typical soldiers he had faced for 7 years. These warriors were enormous, encased in bulky armor that seemed absurdly thick and primitive compared to the sleek, energy-dissipating suits of standard human forces. "Magnified," Fresseltoff ordered, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty. The image zoomed in, revealing details that sent a chill through his hardened shell. The human warriors carried massive, gleaming objects in their hands, objects that Fresseltoff at first didn't recognize. "Are those bladed weapons?" he asked, incredulity evident in his voice. Metvik adjusted the sensors, his outer shell paling rapidly. "Affirmative, Commander. The humans appear to be equipped with swords." A ripple of nervous clicking spread through the command center. Fresseltoff silenced it with a sharp gesture. "Swords," he spat, his shell flushing with derision. "Have they exhausted their ammunition? Are they so desperate they've resorted to primitive tools? This is beyond pathetic. It's insulting." But even as he spoke, something unprecedented was happening on the battlefield. The armored human warriors were advancing with shocking speed toward the Fress front lines, heedless of the plasma fire raining down upon them. Their crude armor, which Althoff had dismissed as primitive, seemed to absorb or deflect the energy weapons with disturbing effectiveness. "All combat units concentrate fire on the new human forces," Fres Althoff ordered, his contempt giving way to the first stirrings of concern. The battlefield erupted in blinding flashes as Fres combat vehicles and infantry units directed their firepower at the advancing humans. It should have been enough to vaporize an entire human battalion. Yet through the smoke and energy discharges, the sword-wielding warriors continued their charge. The fourth quadrant reports unusual energy readings from the human armor. Fressel chittered, frantically working his monitoring station. "It appears to be absorbing our plasma fire and converting it somehow." Before Fresseltoff could respond, the human warriors reached the first line of Fress troops. What followed seared itself into his memory, a vision of horror that would haunt him for the remainder of his life. The human swords, which had appeared to be primitive metal, ignited with crackling energy as they swept through the Fress ranks. Hardened shells designed to withstand the most advanced energy weapons split open beneath these blades as if they were nothing more than fragile egg casings. Fress soldiers, the pride of the Imperium, were being cut down by the dozens, their screams filling the command channel. "What is happening?" Fres Althoff demanded, his composure finally cracking. "Those primitive weapons cannot possibly—" "Sir," Fres Metvik's voice rose to a panicked pitch. "The human fortress, the main gates are opening." On the central display, Fres Althoff watched in mounting horror as the massive doors of the fortress swung outward. From within poured hundreds more of the armored warriors, their swords gleaming in the dying sunlight. The humans from the orbital transports had created a breach in the Fress lines, and now the forces from the fortress were exploiting it, catching the Fress army in a devastating pincer movement. The command center erupted in chaos as reports flooded in from all sectors of the battlefield. Fress units were being overwhelmed, their advanced weapons proving ineffective against the humans' bizarre combination of primitive and cutting-edge technology. "Deploy the Devastator units," Fres Althoff ordered, desperately attempting to regain control of the situation. "All of them!" The towering war machines, pride of the Fress military, stomped forward to engage the human warriors. For a moment, Fres Althoff allowed himself to hope. The Devastators were nearly invulnerable, their weaponry capable of reducing entire city blocks to ash. That hope died as he watched a single human warrior leap onto the leg of the lead Devastator, climbing it with frightening agility. The warrior's sword plunged into a joint in the machine's armor, and to Fres Althoff's disbelief, the blade sank deep, severing critical systems. The Devastator staggered, its weapon systems failing. More humans swarmed the crippled war machine, their swords slicing through its reinforced hull with impossible ease. Within moments, the mighty Devastator crashed to the ground, smoke pouring from a dozen fatal wounds. Across the battlefield, the scene repeated itself. Devastator after Devastator fell to the humans' blades, while on the ground, Fress infantry formations disintegrated under the relentless assault. "Fall back to secondary defensive positions," Fres Althoff ordered, his shell now completely pale with shock. "All units, regroup and establish a perimeter around the command platform." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was too late. The humans were moving too quickly, their sword-wielding warriors cutting through Fress formations like harvesters through grain. The carefully orchestrated final assault, meant to end the human presence on this world once and for all, had transformed into a rout. "Commander," Fressexel's voice was hollow with defeat. "They're surrounding the command platform. 3 minutes until contact." Fres Althoff moved to the tactical display, watching as the blue icons representing human forces encircled the red triangle of the command platform. This couldn't be happening. The Fress were superior in every way. Technology, strategy, numbers. How could humans with swords be defeating them? The first impact against the platform's hull reverberated through the command center, causing the assembled Fress officers to flinch. Something was cutting through the outer armor plating, a process that should have been impossible. "Commander," Fressexel said quietly, his scientific mind still analyzing even in the face of defeat, "I've completed an analysis of the human weapons. They're not simple blades. They appear to be channeling some kind of focused energy field that disrupts the molecular bonds in our armor and our shells. Pressoftov stared at him in horror as the implications sank in. They've engineered weapons specifically designed to counter our defenses? Yes, sir. And their armor seems similarly specialized, designed to absorb and neutralize our energy weapons. Another impact shook the platform, stronger this time. Something was cutting through the main hatch. Pressoftov drew himself up to his full height, though it was barely half that of the human warriors who would soon breach the command center. "Prepare for close combat," he ordered, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "We are fresh. We fight to the end." The command center's door buckled inward, a glowing line appearing along its center as something cut through the reinforced metal from the outside. With a final groan of protesting metal, the door fell inward. A human warrior stood in the doorway, its massive armor scorched from battle but intact. In its hands it held a gleaming sword that crackled with strange energy. The helmet retracted, revealing a face that seemed to Pressoftov both barbaric and terrifyingly intelligent. In the name of humanity, the warrior's voice boomed, "Surrender or die!" More warriors crowded the doorway behind the first, their swords humming with deadly promise. Pressoftov looked around at his officers, saw the fear in their postures, the pale coloration of their shells. In that moment he understood something that would forever change the course of the war. The Fres had become complacent, reliant on their advanced technology, certain of their superiority. But these humans, they had combined their primitive past with targeted technological innovation, becoming something more dangerous than the Fres could have ever imagined. A Fres officer lunged at the human warrior, desperation overriding caution. The human sword moved in a blur, cleaving through the officer's hardened shell with horrifying ease. Ichor sprayed across the command center as the Fres officer collapsed, twitching. Pressoftov began, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. Then, drawing himself up with as much dignity as he could muster, he said, "I surrender. The planet is yours." As more human warriors entered the command center, surrounding the Fres officers, Pressoftov reflected bitterly on the irony of his situation. He had come to deliver the final blow to humanity on this contested world. Instead, he had witnessed the beginning of their resurgence. For 7 years, the Fres had been winning the war against the humans on this world. Then the humans brought swords from orbit and everything changed. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Video shares, memberships, and super thanks help the channel grow as well, so feel free to partner with this channel in that way as we grow. With that all said, thank you again for listening to the story, and thank you for your time. On the left side of your screen are some videos I think you might be interested in. I hope to see you in the next one.